On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Artificial intelligence, take 2. How will AI benefit Judaism? Will it be more of a danger than a benefit? We bring on Judeo-futurist and natural intelligence Zvi Kalman to discuss AI. And stay tuned for textual healing as we debate the Book of Bamidbar. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Yedida Eisenstadt, we are not in heaven.
I am very, very excited about our special guest for today. And I'm also a little bit sad that Matthew's not here for it, but it just means that I get to interrupt Zvi more. So we have a very special guest with us today. Dr. Zvi Kalman is not only a childhood friend of mine, he's also a writer, entrepreneur, and one of the most prominent thinkers at the intersection of Judaism and AI today. He's a research fellow at the Hartman Institute and Sinai and Synapses. He hosts his own Belief in the Future podcast and owns Printocraft Press, an independent publishing house that releases beautiful books, including the illustrated Pirkei Avot and Canadian Noam Sienna's A Rainbow Thread. For anyone interested in thinking about Jewish futurism, which we're about to talk more about, Zvi's Substack, Jello Menorah, is a must-read. You may ask, what is a Jello Menorah? I think Zvi's answer encapsulates the entire ethos of his work. Just imagine it. All of that barely scratches the surface of the amazing work he does, though maybe most importantly for us, Zvi was born and brined in the Great White North, Toronto the Good. So welcome.
Fifth generation Canadian.
Wow. But not your children.
My children, well, they have Canadian citizenship. We made sure to get them that. And who knows what's going to happen over here.
Right. We did that too. So welcome. Welcome to Not in Heaven. For a lot of reasons, Jews spend a lot of time thinking, is this the end of the Jewish way of life? Are we on the edge of collapse? But you, I think, don't think that. And you spend more time thinking about the Jewish future. So can you tell us more about your thinking and what Jewish futurism is?
Yeah. It's very hard for old religions to remember that they started as young at some point, and they started with radical ideas and new ideas, and continue to thrive and survive through a repeated process of generating new and creative ideas, right? The rabbinic project is a creative idea. If you read rabbinic literature and you wonder, where did all these things come from? I mean, maybe the answer is from Sinai, but the answer is also probably from a lot of incredibly creative and thoughtful people trying to think about what does it mean to invent Judaism anew in the wake of the destruction of the Second Temple. And that process happens over and over and over again. I think sometimes, though, when you have a 3,000-year-old tradition, you have the sense of, well, we have an inheritance that's so strong that we actually don't need to do any innovating anymore, that it's all basically done for us. And I think the opposite is true. You actually have a kind of continued mandate to invent and transform. And what that means is that you have to be constantly on the lookout for the next new big idea, the next transformation of Judaism. So Jewish futurism, as I imagine it, is basically that continued search for what are the new emergent ideas of the moment, what are the concepts that are transformative, where do we need to put our efforts going forward? And those are the ideas that are, by definition, kind of on the margins of contemporary Jewish thought. And the point is to move them from the margins to the center.
Okay. My big question is, all of the 3,000-year process that you've described has been driven by human creativity. And so now we are venturing into the brave new world of digital, artificial creativity that is non-human. And I mean, part of why you're here today is to talk to us about sort of AI's role in this process. And I think you also, we're experimenting now with, letting AIs participate in the creative process of the future of Judaism. And It's been to date a human process. The Torah was given to us, not to Claude or Grok or ChatGPT. And, they're not chayav in Torah and mitzvot. They're not obligated in our traditions the way we are. So why are we letting them into the process? Or are we?
Yeah. The way that AI has unfolded over the last few years is really unprecedented. I don't know if it's the most important technology in world history, but it's certainly the fastest moving technology in world history. There's no other technology that has scaled to hundreds of millions to billions of people in a matter of years. And there's no other technology where the distance between a theoretical breakthrough and everyone having access to it can happen in a matter of weeks. So because of that process, basically everyone who isn't working at a major tech company is on the back foot, trying to figure out how to catch up to this. And that leaves a lot of people feeling disempowered out of a sense of, my job is basically to respond to inevitabilities. And it leaves a lot of people feeling like, I don't actually know what my role is. Within the context of Jewish community, for Jewish leaders, I think that's particularly difficult because if you imagine your job is as being some kind of moral voice, but the moral questions seem like they're not worth addressing because no one's going to listen to you anyways, then it's a little hard to figure out what you're actually trying to do in that moment. So I see a lot of Jewish leaders, a lot of Jewish institutions really struggling to figure out how they're actually supposed to respond, and it's hard to do.
How is this different, though, than, in our lifetimes, what we thought was an unprecedented rollout, which was like the web, right? The idea of hypertext and an internet that was linking computers at home and in the offices and, around the world. And people were struggling in using a lot of the same language that we're using now. There's always going to be something that is going to be unprecedented, that is going to be moving us forward. And so what makes this specific era different in your mind?
I'll give you two answers. One answer is that it's different because AI definitionally resembles people. And the fact that it resembles people makes it unlike any other technology because it changes people's relationships with themselves, with their own labor, with their own productivity. That is different from what happens with the internet. The internet obviously can distort people's relationships with each other, can make people devalue physical space and value virtual space more than physical space, but it does not necessarily change the way that people think about what it means to be human. Of course, the AI's success builds on the internet's success. The fact that it can scale up so quickly is because we all have phones in our pockets, we're all looking at screens all the time, and because we have accepted that interacting with other human beings can happen simply through a text interface. And so it's a lot easier to impersonate people when you only need to impersonate the way they write and not the way that their bodies look or the way that they sound or the way they smell or all the other things.
We know that it can come up and sound the way that humans sound also. Like that's
it can do that, but it can't do the whole package yet, meaning the Westworld concept of an AI that it looks fully human, I think is still a ways off and may actually never happen. But when you kind of restrict your senses to just sight and sound, then it's a lot easier. So that's one reason it's different. But I also want to challenge the idea that Jews actually did figure out the internet. Yes, there's a lot of Torah online. Yes, it made Torah accessible in ways that had not been accessible previously. But I think the ways that the internet seemed so beneficial also masked its inherent dangers. I think a really good example of this is social media, right? Social media, I think, was seen very early on as being great, another broadcast, another way to get my ideas, my divrei Torah, my stuff out into the world. And that is true. And at the same time, social media can be incredibly harmful, can actually drain physical communities of their vibrancy. And because so many Jewish leaders kind of turned to social media as an opportunity, especially an educational opportunity, they missed having the chance to actually say, hey, there's something problematic here. Maybe our job is to stand for physical space and physical connection and not simply to take this because we are worried or anxious about our own relevance. I could see the same exact thing happening with AI, in a sense of like, oh, great, we can learn Torah in all these better ways through AI. Wonderful. Like, it's not wrong. But at the same time, it can't be that the ways in which AI is advantageous to Jewish community mean that we were unable to talk about its many, many potential dangers.
So one of the things we talked about last week when we were talking a lot about Grok also was sort of exactly what you've said about how we didn't realize the unintended consequences of the internet and social media. Do you have like a hard and fast rule for yourself that you won't ever use AI as a chavruta, that you won't replace the humans in your life or relationships with AI? Would you like cancel a code of ethics or a way of thinking about our relationships with AI to sort of endeavor to protect ourselves against these unintended consequences and making everything worse?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm still trying to figure it out for myself. There are periods of time when I'm using AI as a thought partner every hour, and there are times when I kind of go a while without using it. And it's hard for me to tell actually which are the more productive moments. Sometimes it feels like AI is allowing me to kind of just zoom along, and sometimes it feels like I'm actually depriving myself of precisely the moments of real, clear, and heavy and deep thought that were quite important. And I'm kind of restricting myself to kind of more service level stuff because I'm delegating all the important tasks to some other entity. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. There was a paper that came out, I believe, last week or the week before, looking at programmers using Cursor, which is a kind of up-and-coming piece of software that incorporates AI in coding. And they discovered that actually, for many programmers, maybe most programmers, using AI slows them down compared to what they would have done otherwise. So there may be a difference between the sense of speeding along and actually speeding along.
In the last week or so, The Economist on their morning newsy podcast has talked about two different AI elements, both of which you just touched on. One, tasks that we have started using AI on, those parts of our brains that like do those tasks, like deep thinking and writing, are becoming weaker. And they've started to do some preliminary experiments with students who use AI to write their papers and students who like do the very hard work of writing. And that, like you said, that AI is predicated on a rich and vibrant intellectual culture of the internet. And already, because AI brings you the answers that it, crawls all over the internet for, that there's less incentive for content production because AI is just giving it to you. And so already there's a concern that actually AI is going to kill the internet because, why would anybody visit a website anymore?
Exactly. Look, the process we're going through now is one in which someone is going to try to use AI to do literally anything that people currently do. And sometimes that will succeed, and sometimes they will successfully replace human beings in that task entirely. And sometimes it will be controversial, and sometimes people will say, like, it's not going to work. I think what it means to be a moral voice in that landscape is to kind of get ahead of it, to not just say, like, oh, we knew all along that, people really did want human teachers and not AIs tutoring them instead, but to actually think in advance of what are the values we're trying to preserve. I think it's the process that we can't afford to do retroactively.
I think it's good because it is asking some really fundamental questions about what we are trying to do within the human project. What are the more novel, more interesting questions that you're seeing actually coming across when it comes to the idea of Jewish values or Jewish law and Jewish practice and using AI in this situation?
So people are using AI to explore Jewish law, I am certain. I know within Christian contexts, people are using AI to explore questions of faith in the same way that people are using AI to do therapy, because there are certain kinds of conversations that are awkward to have with another human being, and it feels like a kind of cheat to be able to just go to a machine and get the answers you're going to get instead. So, that's happening. It may change the role of rabbis. It may mean that people go to rabbis a little bit less. I'm, I guess, not so worried about the move of psak to AI, in part because all it's going to do is reveal the fact that Jewish law is overdetermined, and rabbis all along had a great deal of authority to determine which kind of sources they wanted to use or avoid in coming up with whatever legal opinion they want. So it will have some impact. I think it's kind of inevitable. I'm not so concerned about it. I'm happy for people to have a better understanding of Jewish law, although one thing that may happen as a result is a kind of flattening that can happen when you get psak from an AI that doesn't really know anything, or doesn't really can't really help you appreciate the difference between like a 5th century source and a 17th century source, and just kind of like you see them as names in a list or in a document.
Let's first clarify psak. Psak is a halachic decision, a halachic conclusion. One goes and asks a rabbi for a determination for practical purposes. But can AI give a psak now?
If people accept the psak, then yes. I mean, it's like that joke, like a person says, like I had a dream that, I was a rabbi of 1,000 people, and the response is, come back when 1,000 people dream that you were their rabbi, right? So like if people accept AI's psak, then AI can give psak.
Right. Okay, so that leads to another question that I wanted to think about with you. So there are lots of different Jewish organizations that are using AI in content production now. And my question is whether or not you think that that is a reasonable use of AI at the moment. Like, we know that AI hallucinates. Is it still hallucinating? How good is it? Does it need human supervision? Like, what's a responsible use of AI for content production?
Yeah, it's a really good and it's a really hard question. And it's hard because I think the way that content production is viewed varies a lot depending on where you are in the labor force, right? If you're high up, it can seem like a kind of technical task to design a website. Whereas if you are the website designer, it might feel like, oh, like I'm actually using like my creative abilities in this space. What I think is going to happen is that AI's ability to create some amount of content is going to mean that all of the work in that sector is going to be devalued. It's going to be seen as more trivial than it is. Some designers are going to adapt AI into their workflow to create more work faster. I certainly don't think it's going to mean that anyone has more leisure or is paid better. It may mean that there is more demand of graphic designers, of artists in general, out of a sense of like, well, you have AI at your disposal. Why can't you make this in a quarter of the time that you would have been able to do it before?
I think that's the natural continuation of like what happens once you have graphics design packages, and it makes it so much easier. It didn't mean that everybody can do graphic design, which, yes, everybody could use Canva, but it just meant that the graphic designers figured out where their niche was, which was to edit, to make things better, to show where the good design is. I actually think that that's very true when it comes to content, but I also think it's true very much when it comes to rabbis, when it comes to rabbinic thinking. Because if you look at the dangers of like Rabbi Google, everybody's like, oh, Rabbi Google is going to replace rabbis. Rabbis use Google now all the time to look up their sources. And rabbis use AI to look up sources and at least to double check where all their sources are right or wrong. I'm not worried. I'm actually looking forward to the content that AI is going to be able to generate for Jewish life. I'm looking forward to the halachic ideas that AI is going to, generate, because I think that we're going to figure out how to use these tools the same way we figured out how to use Photoshop and Illustrator and the World Wide Web. Sometimes we didn't get it right.
So I'm really worried that everybody's just going to, cheat their way through everything and not learn how to do things.
No, I don't think so.
We're going to stop reading books. We're going to stop writing books.
That's what people said, in the early 2000s, and they're like, oh, everybody's going to look up their papers online. And teachers figured out how to work around that. And that's the space that we're in right now, where people are saying, oh, your AI can write your paper. Well, let's figure out a way that it's not about whether the AI can write your paper. It's what's the right prompt that you can get. What's the right thing that you can do that shows that you're thinking novel thoughts.
So I think that chain of thought only goes so far, because at some point the AIs are capable of doing more than even the best human being can do within a given area, can write the paper better than you in all circumstances. I don't think it's an accident that many of the folks who are most excited about AI's development also combine that with a vision for humanity's own development, a vision for a kind of a transhumanism, humanity transcending its own bounds, as a way to kind of explain, well, what do you do with humanity when AI is capable of doing all this other stuff that we were able to do before? The idea that actually human beings just want to be able to do their own thing. They don't want to be pushed by AI to become something else, I think is a serious block on AI development, and maybe it should be, right? Maybe there actually is some value in doing things in a classroom, despite the fact that an AI could do those things easily anyways. And the fact that an AI can do them should not mean that human beings must therefore be something other than what they already are. I think if we end up in that direction and kind of have this kind of retroactive mandate for what humanity ought to be because of AI, I don't think that's the way we should be operating. I don't think that we should be operating according to the desires of the folks who are often frequently depicted as being the most reckless in society, right? Like there's so many books out now, like Karen Howe's Empire of AI, which just came out a little while ago, about how like this is the constant operating principle of all these companies is that they want to move as quickly as possible. They are intentionally pushing aside safety concerns. I don't think we want to be operating at that speed. I don't think we can operate at that speed.
The thing that I'm finding we're in a weird place is that the beginning of the internet was very anti-capitalist, anti-corporate, and it ended up being subsumed by that. What happens in this case with AI that you're saying, where it actually starts with large corporations that are actually profit motivated, but people are so aware of it now that we're trying to work around it. And that's where I'm curious what you think about that. How do we deal with the fact that we're in the opposite situation of where the beginning of the internet was, but we're also so much more aware of the dangers of what could possibly happen?
I think the way that AI technologies empower individuals is actually very troubling. There has been a progression over the course of the 20th and now 21st century of giving individual human beings more and more ability to cause destruction without any kind of support mechanism, right? This happens through the development of explosives. It happens through the development of firearms. It happens through the internet. It happens through AI. There are ways in which you can ruin someone's life easily these days by exposing things about them, by doxing them in ways that would not have been anywhere near as possible previously. So I am less optimistic about individual use of AI because I see all the ways that it creates kind of like unstoppable ability of individual human beings to cause harm. I know that in tech circles, a couple of years ago, there was a statement put out around about AI being something like a nuclear weapon in being an existential risk to humanity, and that may be true. But in a lot of ways, AI is also a little bit more like an AK-47, more like an assault rifle, in the sense that it gives individuals huge amounts of power that maybe should be more curtailed, maybe should be used only in certain circumstances rather than basically provided to anyone who has an internet connection.
Isn't that balanced? Isn't the benefits that we're going to might get from AI actually going to balance out whatever possible dangers?
So it may be true, but this is not a law of nature. It's not a law of nature that technology always does good for humanity. And I think that a lot of AI's ability to kind of like seep so quickly into American society relies on decades and decades of goodwill that has been built up around technologies actually offering good things to humanity, making us healthier, making us more productive. And I think that is quickly being spent down. I think a lot of people are saying like, wait a minute, this isn't new technology. It is the frontier. But there was a Pew survey a couple months ago. Most Americans do not think that AI is going to make their lives better, even in relatively uncontroversial places like medical context.
I think a lot of people would actually rather it not be mainstreaming in the way that it is, but feel like, oh, if I don't get on this bandwagon, then I'm going to be lost forever and I will never have another job. And I think that it has so quickly infiltrated all, probably white collar workflows, but also, not white collar as well. And I think it's scary, right? I think people are really worried about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in terms of what you're saying, that social pressure, those network effects that kind of keep people in the system, that's precisely why it is so important for religious institutions to have a moral voice here. Meaning, who is going to be the one to say these technologies are dangerous and wrong, not just on a kind of regulatory level, which is like a kind of big question about how good governments are going to be at regulating AI, but just on a moral level, on a kind of ethical level. If there's no one actually standing up and saying regularly, our community should be very wary about using these technologies, then the only one who has a large, national, international voice are the tech companies themselves. And for some reason, a lot of religious institutions, not just Jews, but Catholics, Protestants, have really struggled with what does it mean to have that major voice in a way that affects people's behavior around AI. I still see that network effect of I got to use it because if I don't use it, then, my career is in the toilet.
So what would you like to see leaders advocating for, right? I asked before about sort of an ethics or a moral code and a policy. It's not just around human creativity and human work, because it can't be just about the economics. It has to be about more. So what are the big questions that inform how you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's a big open question. I think that's the question. I don't know that there's an easy answer to it. I think at some point you have to start talking about don't use X system, or be careful about using X system to actually kind of create those guidelines. And I think everyone has been afraid of saying anything like that because it sounds impossible. And I think to some degree, it is going to be impossible right now. But at least you have to start.
Do you mean like don't use DeepSeek or don't use Grok?
Or don't use them in specific contexts, right? Like to say like these are contexts in which you should not be turning to AI. Even as a kind of...
Like for a chavruta.
Right, or whatever it happens to be. As a way to kind of like establish like, here is another pole that is kind of like stands in opposition to use it for everything. Something for people to at least talk about, to think through. I haven't even seen that. I've seen like a lot of like, well, let's talk about it. You know, nuance. AI is good in these contexts. It's a neutral technology. All the rest. I think actually at some point you have to say, and I'm not the person to say it because I'm not a religious leader. I'm just some guy. That you should not be using AI in certain contexts because otherwise people are just going to keep asking like, well, what do you want us to do? Like that's the thing you do. Right? The thing you do is like, don't use the technology.
Like I jokingly threw out not as a chavruta. So it's interesting. I read your piece about using AI as a chavruta and doing that experiment. You were using it very differently than I've been using it. I've been using it as a tool when I'm crunched for time or I'm really, 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 really struggling to read some Rishon that's writing in like a pidgin, Hebrew, Aramaic with, other languages sprinkled in as well to help me muddle through and make sense of a text. And then I use the suggested translation to read that back into the original to develop my language skills. So I'm very conscious in my own usage. I try really hard to only use it as a tool or to give me a first draft of something, and then I take another crack at it. But you were using AI like really as a conversation partner, which is fascinating. But you also wrote really thoughtfully about how like a chavruta is more than just a dictionary, right? A chavruta is somebody who gets to know you and your questions and the way you think about things and what you know and complements what you know and what you don't know. And like, I don't know, I wouldn't want to be substituting my human relationships with the computer. And so I wonder, like, as we move into schools and thinking about like schools have to do major adapting to this technology. So do you have wisdom for educational spaces or Jewish educational spaces?
Yeah. So just practically speaking, AI, ChatGPT especially, I think is quite good at understanding and analyzing Jewish sources. And I think people are going to end up using it. Separately, I think it is worth entertaining the idea that we should not be using AIs that use stolen information or information that has been used without consent. I think like even like the kind of legal pieces aside, I think there really is open a question about like whether we should be treating like the internet as kind of default allowed, which is basically the way that a lot of AIs are developed. Within a chavruta context, it's clear there's a kind of like asymmetry in AI's ability to be a good chavruta. It's good if you ask it questions, if you say like, what does this acronym mean? What is this referring to? It's often quite good, even at difficult questions. And at the same time, if you say like, please, recall from this passage from the Mishnah or the Talmud, it will often make something up entirely. And that may never go away. That asymmetry may never go away. And at the same time, because AI is designed to please people, it's also going to struggle to really challenge them, in ways that chavruta partners are often looking to each other to be challenged. I don't think it's never going to happen.
Like Avi.
Not an AI.
How do you know?
No, but Avi challenges me regularly, and it's good.
Speaking of this challenge, I'm actually like, if we start by asking, what are the things that we care about as humanity, as a Jewish community? What are the values that we think that are important that AI might be in danger of? Even without asking that question, sort of asking those things first, and then going to people and saying, well, these are the things we value. This is ways in which AI can actually abuse it. So be careful when you're using an AI. Think about these values in advance. You don't want to use AI as your therapist because part of the recognition, part of the value of therapy is being able to talk to another human about it. There's a shortcut in being able to open your soul to another human who then can have empathy for you. So the AI is short-circuiting that, but then it's not doing the right thing. So how do we ask those types of questions, as Yedida was saying, about values and implement them in a positive way rather than everything is bad?
So I think the first step is to admit that we actually don't know what the right values are. I find it helpful to think about questions like AI's moral significance in terms of infection, in terms of pathogens, right? Like when infection enters your body, there's two systems that are used to fight against it. There's a kind of initial, very fast-acting innate system that is good at responding to basically everything, but it doesn't catch everything, right? And sometimes you need a kind of deeper, more adaptive system that is like, oh, I remember this infection before. I need to kind of specialized response. AI is kind of in that second category, in that, and not to say that AI is always a pathogen, but it is the kind of system where, yes, we do have some moral values that can kind of, stick to it in some ways, like, we shouldn't harass people, privacy is value, things like that. But I don't think any of those fully capture AI existing in society. And I think it requires actually developing new values that are connected to existing values, but ones that are specifically designed to address AI. I think we probably need those for the internet as well, and for thinking about virtual spaces. But I don't think we have those yet. One piece of that might be, for example, to make sure that we avoid AIs that are designed with addiction in mind. And this is something which has become really quite frequent in the last 20 years or so, where you have companies that design products not with what does the user want, but how do I induce want. There's an author of a book called The Age of Addiction who calls this limbic capitalism, where you're trying to really make people addicted to whatever your product is. And there are people doing this. People did this with Facebook, using the principles of slot machines to create social media devices, social media apps.
A great example is I don't think Steve Jobs intended people to be addicted to the iPhone, but as soon as the iPhone got invented, everybody realized, we can get people addicted to this
and to the device and to the apps on it, right? And the same thing is happening with AI, right?
Exactly.
It's very easy for that to happen. I don't think we have a way to think about avoid addictive behaviors, avoid addictive tools as being something we should be looking out for in and of itself, and not just in the context of kind of like, some specific area of life. I think we need to, because it is becoming a playbook for more and more companies, but I don't think we're there yet. So that requires actually developing new values which are not taught in school, which have not been developed yet.
Or maybe even recognizing that there are very few universal values, and a lot of values are community contextual. Meaning the values within the broader Jewish community is different from the values within the traditional egalitarian Jewish community versus the Haredi community versus the liberal, Reconstructionist communities. And each of those have their own sets of values for which approaching an AI in general, or the idea of it, might actually
That might be true, but honestly, this stuff is so basic and so universal that forget about Jewish denominations. I have a hard time differentiating between what Jews, Catholics, Muslims think about AI, and that a lot of them end up saying very similar stuff because they're all confronting the same issues, and they're all struggling to find within their traditions clear prescriptions, clear sources to say, do not act in this way around this device. Everyone is struggling. It's not just Jews.
I think that's right. And this whole conversation about AI, I think, is especially interesting because we are people who care about humans. David, Zvi, and I are trained, and Avi, you are also, as a humanist.
To an extent, yeah.
Right? We study the human experience, and we're coming up against our limit. We're meeting the artificial technology that is challenging us to look in the mirror and say, okay, what's making us human if this thing can emulate us so perfectly? Last week, Avi and I and Matthew on the podcast really had an intense conversation about Grok and anti-Semitism. And I made the argument that we're seeing the realization of a moment that Deborah Lipstadt, I think, prophesied in the early 90s, where the dark belly of the internet and all the anti-Semitism that lies therein is now becoming mainstreamed, largely, I think, because of AIs and their not yet fully developed ability, correct me if I'm wrong, to differentiate between reliable, vetted sources of knowledge and the other garbage. And that terrifies me. And I am hoping that you might either tell me that I'm being silly and I have nothing to worry about, or, validate my fears.
I think it's a real concern. I think the silver lining is it's not just a Jewish concern. Meaning there's lots of groups that should be concerned around biases in the data sets used to train AI systems, and an over-reliance on the internet, or treating the internet at face value. Which doesn't go well for Jews, doesn't go well for lots of people. So it may be that anti-Semitism is what wakes Jews up to the fact that this is their problem too, but it's obviously not a uniquely Jewish problem.
that doesn't really make me feel better.
You're going to go down along with everybody else.
Well, so no, but that's really interesting because it gets to the other problem about what should it be trained on, right? And authors and publication companies, you have your own publishing house, right? Like you don't want to just give everything over to the AIs, but I would much rather the AI be trained on real legitimate scholarship than the bogus stuff masquerading as scholarship all over the internet. So I'm torn. That poses an ethical quandary.
Right. And I think actually, after I wrote that piece, a friend of mine who works at Google emailed me saying you could also just tell the AIs to not be anti-Semitic, right? Like, forget about the training data. Just say don't be an anti-Semite. But
you have to be aware of that. It has to even be something that's on your radar.
You need to make sure
that's where I was saying last week was that at the end of the day, we're going to figure out the same way that, we figured out 4chan is a bad actor. At some point, you're going to figure out which AIs are the bad actors and tell people avoid those things because you can't rely on them. What does your daily AI practice, if I can use that term, look like?
I don't know that my usage is particularly interesting. I use it to do some kind of translation if I need to summarize something. If I'm looking for some quick Hebrew to English or Arabic to English translation, then I can use AI for that as well. Sometimes if I'm trying to get research in a new area, I'll use AI, or trying to kind of get a sense of a field. Yeah, I find that very useful, as long as you make sure that the sources that it's coming to you with are actually...
It's all about looking up the sources and making sure that everything's good, the same way you do with Google and Wikipedia and all that. Yeah. So this is what I'm looking forward to. I know that AIs do not have a long memory yet, and I can see that, but they have some sort of memory. I'm looking forward to the point where the AI not only has a long enough memory to know about me, where it knows my capacity for chumrah, for kula, for how much knowledge I need to be prompted, how much I should be able to do on my own, and not to force me to tell me, but it'll be like, what should I be doing here? And to sort of have the AI say, look, I know where you're at when it comes to halachic practice. I think you probably could be pushed in a little bit in this when it comes to what you're doing today. I think you probably can be makel on this side because I know who you are and I know the way that you read sources, but I'm going to give you all the work and I'm going to show you all the work.
Avi, we won't need you anymore.
That's fine. I'm okay with that.
You'll be obsolete.
I am fine with that because I think it's about the practice. It's not about people needing to come to rabbis.
Somebody was trying to get me to write something for them. And this is months and months ago, went to ChatGPT and said, can you write XYZ in the voice of Yedida Eisenstadt? And it was eerie. It was totally creepy. I don't know that my voice is so distinct and unique, but it was kind of creepy that it was able to do that.
First of all, I want to ask, do you think that that's 2 years ahead, 100 years ahead, or it's never actually going to happen? So you should really keep to your sources and stick to doing stuff like that. Because
I'll be a little bit cynical about this. What you're describing is a fancy way of talking to yourself, right? You want the AI to
but I don't
know
have.
who
I want
you
the
are.
memory. I want the thing that has more rationality than I do, and to be honest with me, and to speak. That's often when you talk to your rabbi, and I know because people ask me all the time. I want. Yeah, no, I don't know. I want the rabbi to be a reflection. I want to be a reflection of what this person is saying. I want to have that refined to say, well, I'm not in a position in my life right now where I'm really working on myself in this area, but I'm working on that area. And the AI is going to be able to help you and say, hey, I saw you davened only for 20 minutes this morning. Tomorrow you should probably aim for a few minutes more because you've been working on this and you've been in a good direction.
Oh, that exists already. There's a
this.
Muslim app for that.
Yeah, but I'm saying
the mention on the shelf.
I want it to be everything, but also to give me a break when I know that I need it.
You want it to be your spiritual policeman.
But yes.
I do not want that.
But in a good way, in a way that's the most positive for who I am.
I'll just say there's a fine line between trying to turn AI into some kind of external consultant that is actually useful for you, and actually just externalizing some kind of internal voice, which maybe should require some more reflection before getting externalized in the first place.
I'm worried that we're transferring authority to AI, and it is not worthy of that. I'm worried that we're doing that with PSAC. I'm worried that we're doing that with content creation. I'm worried that we're giving it a level of authority that is not yet warranted. And that is the last word because we have to let David Zvi go. This was such a treat. Thank you so much for joining us on Not in Heaven.
Thank you. This is so much fun.
the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Because of the long-awaited discussion about the Book of Bamidbar and the wilderness that we are talking about, we had to pull Matthew back from the wilderness of his vacation from northern Manitoba just to be able to talk about this. I couldn't do this without all of us here. So, Matthew, thank you for joining us.
I'm excited to be here, but this better be good because I had to make a bunch of scrambled eggs and cut up fruit this morning just to keep the kids at bay. But I'm here. I don't want to be accused of not being a team player because I could not miss this opportunity to hear why Avi thinks what is clearly the third best book in the Torah is the best book in the Torah. But let's hear.
Okay, so Bamidbar to me is the most interesting, and therefore because you have Bereshit and Shemot, it's sort of like the beginnings, the very early, it's like those first chapters of the biography that everybody wants to skip because they haven't gotten to the recording of the first album. Like it's important. It's interesting. There's some really stuff that might be formative, but you want to get to the meat of it. And Bamidbar is the nation of Israel emerging as a personhood, almost like an identity. And I see the book of Bamidbar as like the Bnei Yisrael's adolescence. Right? It's their teen years. And the things that happen in Bamidbar really map onto that in terms of like the rebelliousness of certain individuals, right? Not just Korach, but Miriam and, challenging of authority. And you get to like the asserting of like, we're intelligent people. We know what we're doing. And sometimes they're right when you get the Pesach Sheni and the daughters of Tzolofchad. And that to me is the book of Bamidbar in a nutshell. It's the adolescence of the Bnei Israel from their second year in the desert, where they're barely anything, to the 40th year in the desert when they're ready to become a nation and to go into the land of Israel. Boom.
I'm speechless. I mean, I thought everybody's adolescence and teen years were the years they wanted to like skip over and forget because you're covered in acne, you're hormonally trying to figure yourself out, and I think that you need to like not dwell on that as the highlight of your life.
So hold on. Arguably, you might be right. And I'm sure the Bnei Israel would have wanted to forget the massive sin that they had and all the problems that they did. But the teen years are often the most interesting years that people have. That's why there's so many great teen movies.
So I'm going to switch out interesting for formative. And I'm going to say, it's liminal. It's in between. I hear your argument that it's formative and arguably interesting, though we've already discussed that I don't think it's that interesting. But it's the in between.
I think Devarim is the in between. It's like a week, and it's just a recap of everything in a new light.
Right. So I really like Devarim.
Given what I know. Given they have come over the past 40 years, that's what makes Devarim interesting.
Edita, why do you like Devarim? I feel like I have to kind of smash this whole thing at the end, but I want to hear this first. Why do you like Devarim? Right.
It makes sense that different books speak to us differently at different stages of our life. So it could be that, I don't know how long Avi's really liked Numbers Bamidbar. Maybe it's particularly resonating with him because he's raising teenagers right now.
I'd say about 5-7 years. I was like, oh, lots of people are writing interesting stuff about Bamidbar. Right? Aviva Zornberg had a great book about Bamidbar, which was very different from her other books.
My friend Angela Erisman's book just came out about wilderness narratives. So
okay, careful where you step. We're dropping a lot of names here. Why do you like Devarim?
I used to like Devarim because I sort of liked its simple theology of like, if you do X that you're supposed to do, there will be blessing and rain. And if you don't, then there won't. But obviously everything is much more complex than that. And that's not actually how things work. And that's a problem. So there's something appealing to me about that simplicity. I also like the re-narration. I like comparing the retelling of the story and trying to figure out why the emphasis is different and sort of the literary complexity there. And I like the laws. right? Like it's sort of, for me, Devarim is like the perfect mix of all the things. It's got the narrative and the laws and the right balance with like a clear theology, and it's got good advice, right? And Israel is on the cusp. And yeah, it's just a week, so it's a moment to look back and look forward. And I, as a historian, I'm thinking a lot about how past informs present and future.
I'm not prone to name calling, but you guys are so incredibly lame. Like, this is just like, this is hurting my soul. There's no one in their right mind who would make a defense for either Devarim or Leviticus. They're both tied for fifth. They're not even tied for fourth. They're like heavy on laws. They're boring. Any bar mitzvah student who got Re'eh or got Shoftim, I mean, like,
hey, I got Va'etchanan, so yeah, I know.
No.
Although
like,
I got the consolation prize of having the Shema and the Ten Commandments in my parsha.
It's great, but it's also in the middle of the summer when no one wanted to be in shul. Like,
this is true.
Exodus is clearly the best book. Everything that's formative about the Jewish people happens in Exodus. The Passover story, the plagues, Moses, the burning bush, liberation, the parting of the sea, revelation at Sinai, the Ten Commandments. Like, everything massive and dramatic and important at the beginning of Judaism starts in that book. I don't even think it's an argument. And this is the other thing. Bereshit, like, this is not a book like a biography where you ease into it. We're off to, like, Adam and Eve creation right off the bat. The snake, Cain and Abel. Like, it is amazing story after amazing story. The character development in Genesis and Bereshit is unlike anywhere else in the Torah. You get the patriarchs, all the Joseph stuff at the end. I mean, that was good enough for a musical. I don't even know what to do here. Like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills with you guys.
Here's my Genesis pushback. Okay, Bereshit.
The Genesis pushback.
The Genesis pushback. If you are a real ma'amin, right? You're a super faith. Everything as literal from the Torah. You have to like go through hoops to like, and you're rational. You have to go through hoops to figure out how to make Bereshit work. Right, from all of this fantastical stuff at the beginning, right? If you're like a rationalist and a more liberal thinker, and you say, well, Bereshit was inspired by events, it wasn't true, it's a parable, it's this and that. You have to sort of explain away all of this miraculous stuff. So I'm putting Genesis on the side. Shemot is so like focused on that you can't help but make it overrated. To me, the point about Bamidbar is that it's underrated and therefore it's slept on, and you should really pay attention more to it, more than like you pay so much attention to Shemot. And like, let's take a step back and look at this. Is actually all the stuff here is so much more relatable to us than, we left Egypt in one night. We saw this like thunder and lightning. We split, the sea was split. All of this stuff is so beyond what we can relate to, whereas Bamidbar is so relatable.
Oh, so I don't think so at all.
No,
I find the narrative totally not relatable, and I can relate to the dysfunctional family so much more.
Yeah. And the birth of the nation. I don't know. I feel like, Avi, you're trying to be like, yeah, the Beatles are the greatest band of all time, but because everybody says they're the greatest band, they're a little overrated. So we have to argue why the Kinks were a better band. No, it's just, it's the Beatles, man. Exodus is the Beatles. Come on.
If
Jump
Exodus
on board.
Is the Beatles, I have to figure out what Devarim is.
It's not the Beatles.
Bamidbar is, sorry, but like, okay, but you get what I'm saying, though, that it's severely underrated.
I think I take your point that it's underrated and warrants a second, more critical look. By critical, I mean like, let's figure out how these stories can speak to us. I still would not raise it to the number one spot.
I also think you guys need to remember that you're very sophisticated readers of the Torah who have gone through this every time. I kind of keep thinking, like, what grabs an audience or a reader for the first time? Like, what's the part of the Torah that it's going to really suck them in and really kind of try and, we use the word resonate, or really have meaning for them. And I think you're going to have better luck.
Certainly with respect to the Torah, the laws are framed in terms of the narrative, right? The narrative is the reason that God can grant us law, right? So they're inextricable. Narrative is a great place to start, I agree, to draw people into the human drama that's compelling in the Torah. And I'm not hierarchical here about like whether narrative or law is more compelling. But one thing that I really, really do appreciate is the interrelationship of the two, which I find extra super compelling. The like most basic example of this is you were slaves in Egypt, therefore, be especially sensitive to the call of the orphan, widow, and stranger.
Just from the history of like teaching bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah lessons, kids just seem to love story much more than they love law. right? Even if the rules are things that you can find a way to contextualize in their life, like these are the mitzvot, these are the foundations, the stories of dysfunctional families and the stories of people being oppressed, and the stories of people being freed, like the stories.
But to be fair, on that point, there are so many stories in Bamidbar. You just have to make them.
Stories.
You got to make them relevant.
Guys, hold that thought. We're going to come back to it.
Okay.
Right.
Let's hear what you have to say. On to our textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
So we have a double parsha this week. At the beginning of Parshat Maseh, we get a long enumeration of all of the 42 places that the Israelites traveled to and encamped during their time in the desert. And nobody will be surprised now that I'm really interested in the very long Rashi on that verse, chapter 33, verse 1. And Rashi presents two different interpretations there. The basic question, and Rashi asks it, and lots of other people ask it also, is like, why do we have this here? Basically, from the Exodus from Egypt towards the beginning of the book of Exodus, we've been sort of following Israel on their journey. Why now do we need like a 42 place enumeration? And by the way, a bunch of those places are not actually listed in the journey we've read about so far. So what's this for? What's the purpose of it? So Rashi proposes, his first explanation is that this is to highlight God's kind of like mercy on the Israelites. I'm a rabbi now, so I can say the Jewish people, and that the reason for it is that it could have been a lot worse. That those 42 places are enumerated because 14 of the places was just in the first year, and then 8 of the places were just in the last year, so that leaves you with 20 places, 20 separate trips over the course of 38 years. That's not so bad. It could have been a lot worse. So I think in that read, Rashi is sort of reminding us that it's a matter of perspective, right? It could have been a lot worse. See the history as glass half full and all of the like mercy and kind things and miracles that God did for you in those 42 places. The second interpretation is a analogy from the Midrash in Tanchuma, where Rashi likens it to a king whose son is sick. And the king grabs his kid and travels to take him somewhere where he will be healed. As a parent, right? Like I'm guilty that I'm always like rushing my kids, right? To get their shoes on, get in the car, buckle themselves, like get where we're going. And it's only sort of after we're there that I can take a breath and like think about all the stuff that happened on the way there, the stops along the way. And an interpreter of Rashi suggests that this is about God's love for Bnei Israel, that like this is about also just like reminding us, right? It's God reminding us of all the things that God did for us as expressions of God's love on that 40-year journey. So anyway, the argument that I'm going to make, I think, is about the uses of history and matters of perspectives and the stories that we tell ourselves and how the stories we tell ourselves and whether or not we see the glass as half full inform our actions going forward.
That's a cool idea, but you still had to squeeze a lot out of a book that ends with a whimper, deservedly so.
I don't know. You know, like I said,
I think that's great.
To me,
but Matzah Maseh is just like a snooze fest. You find beauty in subtlety and nuance. I want the hits. I want the blockbuster hits.
Are all your albums, all the music you own is various greatest hits. You have REO Speedwagon, greatest hits.
It's not that.
Michael
it's just
Jackson, greatest hits.
I understand that Bohemian Rhapsody and Stairway to Heaven are classics for a reason. You know, like I don't start trying to say, oh, this incredible song by Emerson, Lake and Palmer should be the best song of all time. Like it just doesn't fit. You got to go to the masses. You got to go to the masses. The Torah is for the masses. It's not in heaven.
Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.